The latest version of C++ contains a new type of for loop called the range-based for loop. This is one of the more visible new features in C++. Introduced in C++ 11, it was quickly implemented in all the major compilers. This gives C++ a simple way of iterating over the elements of a container, an operation that used to take quite a bit more code. So here in Xcode, I've opened a working copy of working.c++, and I'm going to start by defining a simple integer array, and then we'll create a for loop to iterate over this array. And this looks like this. You'll notice that my IDE here, Xcode, doesn't actually know about the range-based for loop. It's giving me the option of creating a normal for loop. And so instead of doing it this way, I'm just going to type it in here. The first argument in the for loop control inside of the parentheses is a variable. And this variable will be used to contain the elements of the container. And then it uses a colon, not a semicolon like in the other for loop. And then the container. And it's as simple as that. And then for the statements, we'll just put a printf to print out the elements of the array. So you can see that this is a lot more simple than the other form of the for loop. I don't have to have the iterator. I don't have to increment anything. This just takes each element of the array or the container, because it also works with STL containers, and it puts it in the variable. And so when I build and run, I get the results like that. Because it's a compile time feature, it knows the size of the array, so I don't have to terminate the array. I don't really have to do very much of anything at all. Just give it a variable and the element itself. This also works with strings, so if we instead here we say character S, like this, then we can use a character C here and change this to S, and the character type in the printf, and now it'll print the elements of the array. Now you remember a string is an array of characters with a terminating 0, so our last element will be blank. And so when I build and run, you see it has the elements, has all the characters, but it also has that empty one at the end. So if I want to, I can test, and I can say if C equals 0, then break. And now we won't get that last blank at the end. This also works nicely with STL containers. And so I'm going to come up here and I'm going to include the string library from the STL. And we'll change this to a string, an STL string rather than a fundamental C string. And because STL strings are not terminated with a 0, I don't need that anymore. And this just works exactly the same. So you can see this is a lot more simple than the other type of for loop, but it only works for containers. So the range-based for loop is a very powerful and useful addition to C++. It provides a simple and effective solution for iterating over the elements of a container. It works just as well with native arrays, STL vectors, strings, initializer lists, and anything that supports sequential iterators. As new code is written in C++ and older code is updated, the range-based for loop is becoming very common.